Greetings to our viewers and listeners. This is the 13th episode of the third season of Debreciner podcast. For those who are listening to us for the first time, Debreciner is an independent news site from Hungary's second biggest city, Debrecen. Our guest today is adventurer, world traveler, and author Chris Long, also known as Wild Kiwi Adventurer from New Zealand. Thank you for accepting our invitation. First of all, what brings you to Hungary?
First of all, thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here today. And what brings me to Hungary? Well, I have visited on several occasions before and have always really enjoyed my time in Hungary. So on this occasion, I'm back to visit a friend who lives here in Debrecen. And I'm currently working in Europe or Northern Europe. So it's a perfect opportunity to take some time off from work and come and visit.
I see. And what is keeping you busy lately?
Well, at the moment, I have been working for the last year and a half with an expedition company. It's called Ocean Wide Expeditions. They're based in Holland, and they run a small ship. It takes 170 passengers to the Arctic and the Antarctic on expeditions. So my position on board is usually either expedition leader or assistant on that ship, and we are in charge of leading the itinerary on board the vessel to the Arctic and Antarctic, which is, of course, where we often see polar bears in the Arctic, we see penguins in the Antarctic. People just want to go and see the completely untouched nature and the wild and windy corners of the globe. So that's what I do.
Mm-hmm. I would like to ask a question about Hungary, actually. From New Zealand, what is your view on this country? Did you know anything about our country other than the general things, or you have like a better knowledge?
That's a very good question. From New Zealand, we learn a lot about the world, but you definitely learn more about some parts of the world than others. I would say Hungary is on the fringes of that. I wish it would be more. At this stage, you learn a little bit. You definitely learn a lot about European history, and that can be from all sorts of different angles. However, you don't know much specifically about the country of Hungary itself. And so that is one reason why in 2013, I believe it was, 2012-13, I set off to explore, in many ways, the unknown to me, which was headed towards Europe. And it's how I first came to Hungary. I started my trip in London, as most New Zealanders do. Unfortunately, most New Zealanders probably don't make it out of London, or maybe they make it to Berlin and whatever, that might be it. But for me, as soon as I stepped foot in London, and then I think my first non-English speaking city was Brussels, that was an experience in itself. And then I went to the next one, which was Berlin. Traveled down to Prague, traveled across to Eastern Czech. So I knew some people from Central Europe I'd actually worked with in New Zealand. So that opened my mind to this part of Europe. And so therefore, as soon as I had that in my mind, of course, I wanted to go and explore it. So I headed through Czech, across to Poland, down to Hungary. And then on my first visit, I came to Debrecen. And then onwards from there, I traveled right through Romania and Bulgaria, across to Turkey, and then from Turkey all the way west to Spain. So for me, as soon as that kind of that idea opened up in my head, I just wanted to keep exploring. And I have to say, in Europe, it's crazy. As a New Zealander, if I leave my country, I fly 3 hours in an airplane before I get to the next country. So whereas in Europe, you could fly almost from one side of Europe to the other side of Europe in 3 hours. So it's quite something for me to be traveling along. And much of Europe, you might be going 100 kilometers an hour across a line, a country border. And then suddenly the food changes, the country changes, the language changes, all of the ideas change. Whereas to me, nothing's really changed. Geographically, it's just, you've just driven across along a road. So for me, coming from New Zealand, it's, I think, 1,000 kilometers or 1,000 miles of ocean from my country to the next. So that's quite mind-blowing as a Kiwi. A Kiwi, of course, is a person from New Zealand, a nickname for New Zealanders. And so, yeah, that was amazing. As a 21-year-old traveling through Europe, you're like, wow, this is crazy.
And what was your first experience with urban life? Was it shocking?
First experience with urban life. So a little bit of background here. I grew up in a very, very remote and wild corner of New Zealand. My family's home is about 42 kilometres from the closest road, and it's 100 kilometres from our closest actual neighbour. So I grew up very much in the wilderness. I learned a lot about the wilderness, wind and waves and weather and forest and oceans, but everything nature. And I travelled to urban areas like Auckland or Christchurch or across to Australia, across to Brisbane as a child, but I hadn't spent much time in cities. So my first ever experience of living in a town, let's call it a town, it's not as big as Debrecen, was going to school in Wanaka, and I did my last year of school in a town there. Then onwards from there, I guess the next step to urban areas would have been actually flying to London, and that was a big step, going from a country where our biggest city is about 1.3 million people, and then you land in London, I believe it's about 12 million people. So, completely different in many different ways, but exciting. Like for me, it was never a challenge. It was just another beginning, actually, of a very long adventure of exploring these different parts of the world, whether it be urban areas, which are extremely exciting, or the far-flung natural areas of the globe as well.
In your YouTube channel, I saw that you try to live a very sustainable life with your family in New Zealand. What would you recommend a method? What is a good method, in your opinion, for people in the cities to take over from this kind of lifestyle?
Yes, great question. So my family, where we live, partly just because we're so geographically isolated from towns and cities, it's so much easier for us to get most of our food from the environment around us, and that where we are usually is in the form of catching fish and growing a vegetable garden. And so we grow a vegetable garden which is quite large. It's big enough to supply pretty much all of the vegetables for my family for most of the year. And we can catch fish. You could also hunt deer sometimes in the forest around. And so moving onwards from there, I live a completely different life now, but I still do carry with me some of those same values and skills that I learned as a child living with mum and dad. And so I think looking at cities are interesting. Cities rely on supply chains, bringing things into a city. Europe as a whole supplies much of its own food and everything, but it's still relying on supply chains, bringing things in from potentially outside of Europe as well, trade and all that sort of thing, or outside of a city, things are coming into the city from the countryside. Just simple food, water, and supplies, that sort of thing for the place. So I think my single biggest piece of advice is, where possible, produce something yourself. Like in many parts of the world, people have they grow grass. Humans are very good at growing grass. They're not very good at growing things like a pot plant, which is a tomato plant, which you can then eat the tomatoes from. And you can do that in an apartment. You can do that in a small house. You can do it in a house in the countryside. It doesn't really matter where you are. There's still ways of producing just a little bit of food, at least yourself. Something like a tomato plant is extremely easy to grow in a pot. Or perhaps you can get like one of those bags of potting mixes. You can smash a couple of holes in the top of those, put a little tomato plant in, and then you've got that growing. You could grow a lettuce. You could grow a little zucchini plant. There's a few different things that you can grow like that. And there's a couple of advantages here. Because one, when you pick that tomato, it hasn't traveled from outside of that city or perhaps from another country. Like in Europe, I know a lot of tomatoes come from Netherlands, for example. So it's traveled a long distance before it's actually got to your fridge and then you eat it. Whereas you could just plant the seed and you could actually grow it where you are. Second advantage is often the food that you grow tastes really good. It's extremely healthy and tastes, in my opinion, much, much better. Because you pick it when it's perfectly ripe, you pick it, you eat it, whereas the one that was grown in the Netherlands was picked God knows how long ago. It was quite probably not ripe when it was picked, and then it's travelled all the way to you, and then now you pick it up and eat it. It's not quite the same product as if you just pop it off the plant and eat it yourself. So that's what I would like to see more of in the world, and I definitely hope to inspire people to do that a little bit more. It doesn't have to be you growing a huge garden. If you can, that's great. If you live in the countryside, go for it. You can grow so much of your food yourself. That's extremely satisfying and sustainable. But even in the city, you can just do a little bit, and that's a really good start, I think.
I see. What are your views on the climate change? Because we understand it directly affects the area where you grew up.
Yeah, so climate change is an interesting one. Yes, it affects the area where I grew up in New Zealand due to coastal erosion. I grew up 50 meters from the sea, so slowly the ocean is eating away at the land around home. And then I've spent much of my adult life working in the Arctic regions, which is potentially where climate change can have the largest effect, and that's obviously where ice could be melting to raise the sea level. And so I worked at one stage with scientists at the New Zealand Antarctic Research Station called Scott Base. It's about 3,000 kilometres south from New Zealand. Yes, you can go even further south from New Zealand, and down there's a lot of climate change research which is happening. I was not directly involved in that. I was looking after the scientists to keep them alive while they did the research. I'm not a scientist myself. But that was quite cool because I got to see a lot of different projects and speak with a lot of different people who were down there studying different things. On a scale of Antarctica is a continent so large, it's almost the size of Europe, US, whatever, which is just completely covered in ice. And I believe it's 2% of the continent of Antarctica is rock. Everything else is ice covered. So it's on a scale so large that it's almost impossible for a human really to see change down there. They can do measurements and studies on a very large scale to be seeing this. As a human going there, you won't probably see change. The place you might see change is actually where I was just flew down from a couple of days ago, which is Svalbard, and that's about 800 kilometers north from Norway. From the very north of Norway, continue north. You get to Svalbard or Spitsbergen, and that's where I work now. And so we do expeditions around, and one of the attractions of Svalbard is its amazing glaciers, but it's not completely glacier covered like Antarctica. Antarctica is just basically one big solid block of ice. When you go to Svalbard, it's a landscape which is, let's say, 40 to 50% land, and then 40-50% glaciers. And so it's a lot more obvious. You can see where the glaciers are. And the glaciers tend to come down from the tops of the mountains. They come down in the valleys. They often terminate into the ocean. Sometimes they terminate on land. And so it's quite easy to see smaller changes in those glaciers. I've only been up there for a couple of years. I personally won't see any changes yet in my time there. However, I have worked with people who've been up there for 10 or 20 years, and you'll be going along in the ship with them, and they'll point to two glaciers next to each other, and they'll say, when I began, they were actually joined and they were one, because the glacier came further down the mountain. Probably one change that I see quite often with this, because just so you know, I think there's only 4% of glaciers in Svalbard are not retreating. So the other 96% are retreating, getting smaller. And so sometimes I'll take people out in the little boats from the ship, and we go and drive around near the glacier. And you take out your phone and look at your maps on your phone, and you get the little GPS dot telling you where you are. And on the map, it will tell you you're actually in the glacier. And that is because when the map was made, the glacier would have come out potentially 2 to 4 kilometers further out the valley, out into the ocean, 2 to 4 kilometers further. Now we've driven along in our boat, glacier's not there anymore, it's 4 kilometers further up the valley, and so you look at your map, and I'm guessing it's about 10 to 20 to 30 years since the maps were made. It's a little bit hard to know exactly, but it would be in that time frame. that long ago, it was the glacier completely out where we would now be driving a boat in the fjord. So that's definitely probably the biggest thing I've noticed. You look at it every time you go and do a boat cruise around a glacier in Svalbard, and it's like that.
But also, like, you can see the changes, like not in the Antarctic exactly, but in countries that are like more affected with the water rising and weather getting extreme, especially in the summer.
Extreme weather is one that's affecting a lot of places. New Zealand gets that. I know you guys get it in Europe, whether it be heat or storms or whatever it might be that's happening down where. So New Zealand's an interesting one. It's a good example when it comes to extreme weather. Usually we don't get cyclones. We call it a hurricane. We call it a cyclone in the Southern Hemisphere. It's the same thing. Usually we don't get those in New Zealand because a cyclone or a hurricane comes from hot water. It comes near the equator. It's formed in the equator. Usually once they drift further south or north away from the equator, the water cools down and those storms lose their power. So it'll still be a big storm, but it won't be destructive. Now, in the last 5 or 6 years, New Zealand's had several of these storms that have been very, very strong storms towards the equator. They've drifted south and they have not lost their power. So they've come, by the time they hit New Zealand, they are still strong, and they will do destruction on a scale which New Zealand is not used to because we're not used to storms like that. So that's definitely a big change with that you see over time for sure. Also, there's some places like most cities, you guys don't have to worry about this, but many cities in the world are built at sea level, and so over time, there's streets that are starting to just flood a little bit on a high tide. If there's an earthquake or something and the land might shake down a little bit, then suddenly the water's coming in. Doesn't take very much when you're by sea level to notice some change of the water coming up. Not something you have to worry about in Hungary for a little while yet, I think.
Yes, of course. You mentioned working at Scott Base. What would you say, what is the most important soft skill that you have mastered?
Most important soft skill for working in really remote places is just that ability to work in a small team of people. You're often living together now I'm on a ship, so I am in a team of about 20 people, an extended team of 70. We're on a ship, we work together. You might be their boss or they might be your boss. And then you work together, you socialize together, you eat dinner together, and then you're probably sharing a room with one of them as well. And so it's that skill of just getting along with everyone, being able to, you might have a disagreement at work, but then it's 7 o'clock now, we're not at work anymore, so that disagreement is behind us, and now we're going to go and have a beer together in the bar, sort of thing. It's that is so important. If you cannot do that, then you can never work in a small team of people so remote, because we don't go home to our friends and family at night. We are still there with our friends, which are also our colleagues from 5 hours ago when we were at work. So that would have to be the biggest for sure.
So now, can you tell us a few words about your job? Like you teach scientists in very extreme conditions in the Arctic. What are the main things you teach these scientists in the Arctic?
Yeah, so just to go back a little bit, I've had a few different jobs. So I think, in fact, I've done 17 jobs in 13 years in five continents and lived in 6 countries. So I've done a few different things. One of the jobs was working with scientists. This was actually in Antarctica. So we'd have scientists come down to the New Zealand Research Station. These are extremely smart people, know a lot of things about usually a very narrow field, let's say glaciology or marine biology. And they might know very little about cold and living in the cold and surviving in a cold place. So that was my job, was to teach them a basic survival course and how to live in Antarctica. Basic would turn very quickly into advanced because some of them would be headed out into the field of Antarctica to live in a tent in minus 20 to 40 degrees potentially for 2 to 3 months sometimes. That's the extreme end of them. And so a lot of these people needed a bit of help to actually live in those conditions. And so my job was to teach them how to do that and how to be safe and survive, but also be able to help them so that they could actually do their job that they were there to do, whatever that might be. So, if your hands are cold, you can't use a computer. So you're teaching these people how to do their job in this harsh environment. Moving on from there, now I actually work, the ship I work on is a tourist ship. So we have 170, up to 170 passengers, and we do small expeditions, usually perhaps 10 to 20 days in these polar regions, up in the Arctic and down in the Antarctic. And so now it's more for tourism, but it's the same thing. I'm taking people to these places who aren't used to living in such a cold environment or being in such a cold environment, and you're taking them out to show them different sites and different things that they're there to see, but it's my job to keep them safe, to actually take them there, but also to keep them safe while they're there. So pretty much whatever I'm doing, I'm always just looking after and managing and training people on how to be in a cold environment. It's quite funny because I don't actually like the cold myself, but somehow my profession has turned into living and taking people to these cold places. So therefore, when I'm on holiday, I'm going somewhere warm and lying on a beach or traveling around a warm country in summer, which is great here in Debrecen at the moment. Is just the absolute perfect temperature. Could not be better. Yes, very happy.
Yeah, I see. You mentioned how important are social skills. I wanted to ask, did growing up in relative isolation make it difficult to acquire these social skills? Or on the other hand, did it turn your family into a extremely unbreakable unit?
Definitely turns your family into a strong unit. It was, I would say, very, very, very difficult to learn those social skills where I was. I was quite good at socializing and talking with and being around adults, but there just wasn't many people my own age, if not any, I should say. And so, yeah, I spent 17 years of my life living there. But for my last year of school, I decided to make the large change. Before that, I was homeschooled at home. But after that, I made the large decision to move away from home, to leave my family and go and spend my last year of school in a town called Wanaka. That was a normal school, normal people doing a normal life in a pretty cool part of New Zealand, I'd have to say. But that was very much my time to learn to be social. And I knew it was going to be a challenge. It was a huge challenge, but it was also exciting. I was completely out there in the world as a very young adult, free to the world, and there was a lot I had to learn about the world. Looking back, I think it probably took me about 3 years to learn, to properly learn how to be social with people your own age, to fit in with a group, a friends group, have lots of friends, talk with one person, talk with a group of people. There's a lot of, or talk in front of people. That was the scariest of all. Took me about 3 years. It was like a crash course. When I do things, I like to do it properly. So I just went completely all in. I'd say yes to anything at school. I'd be in the rock climbing club. I'd be learning to ski with people on the weekends. I'd hang out with people after school, whatever. I was kind of up for anything. And that was my way of just throwing myself in at the deep end and learning to swim. I was always going to learn to swim. There was no other option in my mind. That was what I was there to do. So within about 3 years of that, I felt that I was pretty much the same as I would have been had I grown up in a town in let's say a normal life. Yeah. And then after that, I could continue working on it, refine my social skills more, but it was much less important by that point because I had done most of it. So once I'd done that, it put me in a very unique position because to learn the ways of the wilderness, to learn the ways of how to truly live and survive in the wilderness, that takes many years. That takes half a lifetime. And so I'd already learned that. I was very lucky to have learned that when you're a child. It's very easy to learn things when you're a child. And so then I'd learnt the ways of the social world, the modern world, or whatever you want to call it as well. Then there was nothing holding me back. I could go live in a city if I wanted to, but I could also go and live in Antarctica or some wilderness area in the world and survive there as well. So then I felt very lucky to have those skills, and that's what I've kind of turned into my profession, my work as well. It's taking people into the wild parts of the world, which is the rarest skill to have. Most of us are pretty good at living in cities. Not so many people are comfortable living out in the wilderness.
Yeah, you mentioned living in the wilderness and growing up. What are your relationship with animals? Did you have any growing up, or you just met them in the wilderness or something?
Yeah, mostly when it doesn't go for everyone who lives in the wilderness, but at least for us, for pets, we had one pet chicken. That was all. So most of the animals that we interacted with were out in the wilderness. So they were wild animals, and that's how animals, you could say, should be. Most animals in the world are domesticated, and most are livestock. But there's still a small percentage of animals in the world which live in the wild, and that's their home. They are completely wild animals, and you can have interaction with them as humans, but they are still them. They still know how to look after themselves. They still know how to eat and live in the wilderness. And so as kids, we would have interactions with those. The beautiful birds around New Zealand, or it might be some deer walking around on the mountains, or you might go swimming in the ocean. You see the fish in the ocean. But that they are still wild, and we learn to respect that about them. We also caught a lot of fish as kids, and as a family, and that's what we lived off. But we did it in a sustainable way. So here's an example. If you're off to collect shellfish, there's a type of shellfish, we call it a pawa. You could also call it an abalone. It's about this big. It's a single shell, and it sits on the rocks. It's got the meat on the inside. And if you go to collect those, you might see 3 or 4 of those on a rock, and we would take one. If you take one, then when you come back in a month's time, there'll still be another one there that you can get. If you come back in 5 years' time, there'll still be 5 there, because they have bred and with the other ones around that live in the same rock pools. In the modern world, the mindset would be, hey, there's 5, we should take them all. But that doesn't work, because you might maybe next time you come back, there'll be some more there and you can take all of those ones. But in 3 years' time, or 10 years' time, or 20 years' time, one day there won't be any more, because you've taken them all. You've killed the breeding stock, you've taken them, there is no more to breed. And unfortunately, in the modern world, that is really a lot of places that you go. You snorkel on a coral reef and somewhere in the tropics, you go up to the north or the south of the world, and fishing stocks have been destroyed. Sadly, very sadly. Back at home, the fish stocks are exactly the same as they ever were. And we kind of look after that around us. So that was a very good interaction with the natural world that we had, and the animals and whatever. Yes, sometimes you do take them to eat, but you do it in a respectful way. That way they will always be there in the future.
And what about dogs? We saw the dog sledding videos.
Yes. So I worked in Norway. This was 2019. I was there for 6 months, and then COVID happened, so I stayed on for about another year. And I was working with husky dogs. And this is a funny one, because I'd never ever worked with animals before. Never really worked on a farm. I'd never had a dog, never had a cat. I'd never been around dogs very much. They were cute, but that was kind of all I'd really ever interacted with dogs. And so I decided just to throw myself in at the deep end and apply for a job at a husky kennel in Norway. They had 300 husky dogs, and I spent close to 2 years living in Norway at the kennel with 150 to 300 dogs around all the time. So you'd be lying in bed at night, you'd hear them howling to the moon or the sunshine, whatever it might be, up there in Norway. And then in the daytime, you'd be out feeding them and then looking after them. And then they were, of course, used used for husky sled rides for tourists that would come into Tromsø every day. And so, yeah, that was my job. It was amazing. It was very physically quite hard work, but very rewarding because you always were surrounded by dogs. Everywhere you looked, there was dogs. The boss had 8 dogs in her house and in her bedroom usually. You could take as many huskies to your cabin as you wanted, sort of thing. So I would always have at least 1 or 2 huskies would just be following you around everywhere that you went. It was a lot of fun. Really enjoyed that.
Yeah, as our last question, I would ask you about your future plans. Can we expect your YouTube channel to be alive again?
Well, we will see about the YouTube channel. Watch this space. I really love to share my adventures with different people around the world. And that's the beauty of YouTube. You can make one video, anyone in the world can see it if they want to or if they know about it. And so I've had a lot of satisfaction in sharing that. At the same time, editing is it takes so long to edit up a video. And so with time, I will for sure do some more YouTubing. At the moment, I'm working with this company called Ocean Wide Expeditions, and I'm on a permanent contract with them. It's my first time to ever have a permanent contract and actually say, yes, I will stay with a company longer than perhaps 6 months. Really enjoy working with them. And I plan to continue to grow with them, working in the Arctic and the Antarctic. So if we follow summer, we're always in summer, but it doesn't feel like summer. It's cold. But I get a lot of satisfaction out of that job. They look after me well, and they are very happy to have my skills in the company. So it's kind of a very good relationship that I have with them, which is nice. Hopefully that continues, and I would plan to work with them for at least 5 years. We'll see how we go with that, but I would be happy to be there for that time at least. And then in the rest of my life, so I have half of my life sorted. That's my working life sorted for now. Personal life, when I'm not at work, I'm usually traveling somewhere in the world, whether it's usually traveling back to New Zealand potentially. I'll spend a little bit of time with family and then I'll travel away again, back to work. I don't have a home. I don't live any particular place. I have a car in New Zealand with some personal belongings inside, parked at my sister's place. I might use that once or twice a year. Besides that, yeah, I don't know where I'm going to end up. I don't know if I will ever end up in one place. I'm actually really happy and very good at living out of my backpack, wherever that might be in the world. It gives me the advantage to go wherever I want. But there's definitely some challenges to that as well. Like, I have friends all over the globe, but there's no one place I can go to visit my friends. They're scattered across the world. And that's definitely a challenge. One day it'd be nice to have a bit more of one place where you'd have your friends and family that you could go back to. But then that's challenging as well, because once you've seen lots of the world, nowhere has everything. Nowhere is perfect. So to stop in one place, then you'd have to accept for not perfect. So I really don't know at this stage. I'm quite happy doing what I'm doing. And watch the space. You can see my YouTube videos when or if I make them. I definitely post on Instagram a little bit more about where I am and what I'm doing. That's probably a better way to keep up with where I am currently. And other than that, yeah, adventure continues. And I look forward to plenty more. Hopefully can come back to Hungary again multiple times in future as well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for accepting our invitation. And in today's Debreciner podcast, our guest was Chris Long, adventurer, world traveler, and author from New Zealand. This podcast was made by the crew of Debreciner. If you want to listen to similar content in the future, please subscribe on the site debreciner.hu. Thank you for listening to us, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.